Welcome to Fast Keto. I'm your host, Ketogenic Girl. Did you know that you actually have the option to either be a sugar burner or a fat burner? It's called having a metabolic advantage, as Dr. Ben Beekman would put it. You can actually burn your own stored body fat for fuel. On this show, we talk about ketogenesis, fasting, biohacking, all with the goal of optimal body composition for longevity and having the highest possible quality of life. I hope you enjoy these interviews and solo casts that I present to you, all with this goal in mind. All right, guys, welcome back to Fast Keto. I am so excited for today's episode and to share it with you. It is with one of my favorite doctors, Dr. Gary Fettke. He is an orthopedic surgeon that is based in Tasmania. And if you have not heard of him yet, he was silenced for recommending that his patients reduce their sugar intake and their intake of processed carbohydrates and reintroduce healthy saturated fats back into their diet and focus on eating a whole foods diet. He was tired of doing amputations on people who had been suffering from diabetes, from complications that were, in his opinion, coming about because of a lot of high sugar intake, processed carb intake, and he wanted to be a proponent of preventative health and help prevent all of these people from having to have their, feet amputated, their toes amputated. And this is a regular thing that people don't talk about, I think, enough, the complications that arise from diabetes. And we don't really see the end stages of it and how horrific it can be when there is significant damage from blood vessels, from these molecules that circulate in our bloodstream that become glycated and oxidized and modified from really high sugar, high processed food intake, and the impact on our health of not eating real food, of not eating healthy fats. And so he wanted to prevent people from having these amputations and surgeries, and he was basically reported and he was silenced, and he had an extensive 2.5-year investigation where they were trying to silence him from talking to his patients and the community about the health benefits of reducing sugar and processed carbohydrates. He defended himself successfully, and he has been cleared of all trumped up charges by the National AHPRA Medical Board after 4.5 years of fighting this. And it's just an incredible story. It's incredible that Dr. Gary Fettke went through this and also was able to defend himself so successfully with the help of his wife as well, Belinda, who is quite an incredible person. And I got to meet both of them in November at the low carb event that we had in Mallorca, which is one of my favorite events that is put on by Low Carb Universe. I got to spend some time with Dr. Gary and with Belinda there that week, and they're such wonderful people. You will see just how good-humored and hilarious Dr. Fettke is, and it's just such a thrill to get to have him on the show and share some of his knowledge and expertise being a physician, a senior orthopedic surgeon, and just all of his experience working with clients and helping them and providing them with tips on how to successfully transition their lifestyle, cut down and reduce sugar intake and processed carbs. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's interview and episode with Dr. Gary Fettke as much as I enjoyed getting to record it. All right, guys, I know how important feeding your families nutrient-dense food is and also saving time and money, and that's why I love ButcherBox. They make it easy to get high-quality, humanely raised meat. Every month, they deliver 100% grass-fed, grass-finished beef, free-range organic chicken, heritage-bred pork, wild Alaskan salmon directly to your door. The incredible quality of their meats start with their commitment commitment to having humanely raised animals that are never given any antibiotics or added hormones. Now, how it works is you choose from 4 different curated boxes that include a mix of high-quality grass-fed, grass-finished beef, the chicken, the pork, or you customize your own box so you can get exactly what you and your family will love. Each box comes with at least 9 to 11 pounds of meat, which is enough for 24 individual-sized meals, and the meals work out to about $6 each. The meat is frozen at the peak of freshness in individual vacuum seals packed, and all the meat is delivered right to your doorstep with free shipping. Now, right now, ButcherBox is offering juicy, flavorful, grill-ready, 100% grass-fed beef burgers perfect for any summer cookout. Their burgers are ready to go. They are 1/3 of a pound patties that can be simply tossed on the grill for an easy weeknight meal, or doctored up to create a show-stopping bacon cheeseburger for your neighborhood barbecue. Now, right now, new members signing up will get 6 burgers for free in every single delivered box until October 15th. This is their best offer of the summer, and right now you can get $20 off your first box, including a package of 6 burgers for free in every single box all summer until October 15th. If you go to butcherbox.com/fastketo or enter the promo code fastketo at checkout. That's go to butcherbox.com/fastketo or enter the promo code fastketo at checkout. Hello, Gary. Welcome to Fast Keto. Thank you so much for joining us here all the way from Tasmania.
Well, it's actually today for you, isn't it? So we're in the morning here, Vanessa.
That's what we figured out, is the time difference is significant.
It's great to catch up with you once again.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that you're able to be here joining us. And for any of our listeners who may be newer to the keto or low carb space, maybe you could start off and just tell them a little bit about what brought you to keto and low carb.
Well, just before that, I've got to thank you formally for your cookbook, which arrived to us in that convoluted fashion in Mallorca, and I realised that you gave it to us because it became our luggage rather than yours. But it's fabulous.
You're on to me.
It's part of the travelling here to try and get your suitcase lighter as you move along. But no, it's a
Yes.
great book, and you need to be commended for it. So,
Thank you so much.
look, I have a convoluted story, and I'm an orthopaedic surgeon in Tasmania, Australia, which is that little island just off the bottom end of Australia and somewhat isolated. For many years, I've looked after the complications of diabetes, predominantly in our northern Tasmanian community. And some years ago, many years ago, I got sick and tired of actually chopping into diabetic feet and amputating limbs, which is just an awful thing for people to go through. And I just saw it as needless waste. And I found in hospital that I'm trying to actually control these patients, their diabetes, and they're being fed 3 ice creams per day. And if that sounds crazy, I said, look, we need to do something about that. And I was told that's the hospital food guidelines in Australia, to give 3 people, up to 3 ice creams per day. And in my hospital, they were actually giving it to the patients. And they said, on top of, apple juice, orange juice, soft drink, carbohydrate loaded meals, all of which were spinning my patients' diabetes out of control. So I became interested in the topic of sugar primarily, partly because of my patients, partly because I actually had a cancer at the base of my brain 20 odd years ago. And so part of it was self-preservation. I was also, 23 kilos heavier than where I am now. I was pre-diabetic. My blood pressure was up. I was a perfect example of a becoming middle-aged doctor who was thinking they knew what they needed to do with their own health, but was clearly going in the wrong direction. And I was actually doing the right thing. I was eating by the dietary food guidelines. I was having my cereal grain, washing it down with some fruit juice, fresh fruit juice for breakfast. and having a bit of bread with honey on it, because honey's natural. And ultimately, I was having approximately 20 to 30 teaspoons of sugar for breakfast, and I was starving by morning tea, looking in the tea room for the biscuits, yo-yoing up and down with my weight. I was exercising and running, trying to keep it down, and it was just a ridiculous spiral. And then I came across this concept of sugar being, partly related to it, and I lost 8 kilos in 8 weeks. I then tried to prove the theory wrong for myself. I started researching it, and this is about nearly 10 years ago, and I couldn't. And I started looking into fructose metabolism in particular, and that's why I've got a website called nofructose.com, and it's my byline on Twitter with Fructose No. And the concept of fructose was actually not the concept, the actual biochemistry of it was pretty well only definitively described in 2010. So most people's textbooks, even the current ones, have very little about fructose. So the long and the short of it, I worked out the perils of sugar, particularly fructose, early on, and started applying that to myself and then to my patients. And then as time went on, I started recognizing the issues of polyunsaturated oils in the equation, and then the concept of carbohydrate loading. Recognizing that for you and most of your listeners, people are, start hearing about keto and how it's got its beneficial, and I prefer to call it low carb, healthy fat living. And in some respects, I'm jealous of you because you've got it all there on a plate right from the word go. Whereas for myself and others, it was a transition from working out that the dietary guidelines were unhealthy, and then the transition to giving up sugar, then the seed oils, and then the carbohydrate. So Belinda, who's my wife, kept on. I'd come home from work, or I'd come home and say, "I've got another idea. We've got to get rid of the sugar, and we've got to get rid of the oils, and then we've got to get rid of the carbohydrate and everything." And I got to a point where she said, "If I come home one more day and take one more thing out of the house, I might be going with it." But you've met Belinda, so you know she's actually lovely. But if you truly know her, she's actually, she can be quite tough. So I lived in fear when I said, "Okay, everything in the pantry needs to go now." And her one line was, she said, "If you take bacon out of my life, that's it." And so bacon's still there. So I mean, I know that's been a transition or a journey for many people.
Mm-hmm.
But my story then goes when I started to do something with that knowledge. And so initially I started trying to bring this to the recognition of the hospital staff and tried to make changes within the hospital system. In the same time frame, I started, Belinda said, and our daughter said, "Look, you've got to get on social media to get this message out." And they signed me up to social media in the transit lounge at Los Angeles Airport many years ago now. And what an interesting journey it's been since then. As it turned out, that transition to social media gave me a public awareness, and the hospital dietitians were very unhappy with the fact that I was trying to tell them how to do their job, particularly with the amount of sugar. I then incurred their wrath through their peak body, the Dietitians Association of Australia, and their CEO started writing to the hospital saying that I effectively needed to be silenced. My social media presence became a bit bigger, not much by any stretch of the imagination, but when I got to 1,000 people following me on Facebook, which doesn't sound like many, but obviously was enough to upset the system, I was reported to the Medical Board of Australia for being dangerous because I was promoting that my patients reduce their sugar, seed oils and carbohydrate in their diet. Ultimately, I was reported 3 times to the National Medical Board, and in retrospect now, we have documentation internal documentation from the Australian Breakfast Cereal Manufacturing Group. That's the cereal industry of Australia and New Zealand. The CEO's there saying that I was to be targeted in 2014 for having a public media profile.
Wow.
So those internal documents named 8 people in Australia for targeting, and I was the only only medical professional or the only doctor on that list. So they were in fact involved in financing the Dietitians Association of Australia. And we've got all this documentation. It's all been submitted to a Senate inquiry and as well as the National Medical Board. But effectively, we have in 2014 the cereal industry here of Australia with a document saying their profits are down because of the concepts of low carb and paleo at that time, and that these people are to be targeted in the media, utilising these media influencers. And as it turned out, that's exactly when the Dietitians Association of Australia was coming after me and submitting material to the medical board.
That's incredible that you have it in actual documentation, that, seeing your name on a list like that.
Well, we only came across that documentation last year, so in 2018, but it certainly tied up the whole picture.
Mm-hmm.
And because we've made that material public, it's actually had repercussions to the system, which is good. So effectively, I didn't know why I was being targeted originally. All I was talking about was biochemistry and very clear clinical results. Yet the medical board took it all very seriously. And over some years, 2.5 years, I submitted pretty well a thesis of biochemistry results and my defence. Tim Noakes and I became very good friends in that time frame because Tim's case was public and in South Africa, and mine was private behind closed doors. And in Australia, we have pretty well a star chamber investigation system, which allows people to make complaints and not have to defend their claims. But once you're actually under investigation, it very much is a star chamber with very poor communication. And that whole process here in Australia has been under investigation, partly as a result of what they did to me. So long and short of it, the Medical Board of Australia finally came down with a finding saying that I wasn't qualified by means of my medical degree to offer nutritional advice. Very much similar to Tim Noakes, and that we then defended it very actively, and with the support of social media and the public, it became a significant incident here in Australia and arguably well beyond that reach. Last year, about further more than 2 years, nearly 2.5 years further down the track, I was able had that finding overturned 3 months after Tim's, and so Tim and I had a bit of a celebratory Skype at that point in time. But the important thing about all of that is that Tim and I stuck to our guns about the biochemistry. The science is actually sound, and it allowed many other doctors and health professionals to then stand up and say, actually, we can get away. We not get away with it. Sorry, we're just talking preventative health. We're talking preventative medicine. We're talking about the health of the people based on eating real food. So it was fairly significant finding for both Tim and myself, and following on from Anna Dahlquist's clearance in Sweden a few years earlier. It really has allowed healthcare professionals to now actually speak up safely, knowing that when dietitians associations come after you, or when the cereal industry comes after you, in my case, that you can actually defend that. And we've set a precedent, at least in the Western societies. So, that's my story of how I became interested in it. For many years, I was defending the science, both to my patients, to my medical community, and then in the public arena, and then in the private, behind closed doors to the medical board. And Belinda's work is and you heard some of it when in Spain last year, is that she said, you guys are just going all blue in the face talking the science. Why isn't anyone listening to you? So her work was to start working out who were the vested interests behind all of this that were stopping the message coming out. And that's pretty well where we've been for the last 2 years, I suppose. Pointing out exactly who's been behind this. So I've been, I'll still talk to science and the biochemistry in my presentations, but the vested interests are the ones that fascinate us. And when you start realizing the depths of those vested interests through to the World Health Organization, the United Nations, the major advisory boards to nutrition throughout the world, not just in the Western nations, where religious ideology comes in, who's actually, being influenced right through to the US Congress, British Parliament, the Australian politicians here. It is a fascinating journey as to why this message is being silenced. And it's not simply just down to big business and dollars. It's actually not just down to the pharmaceutical industry protecting their turf ultimately, but it comes down to religious ideology as well.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the missing component. A lot of people are familiar with big food and refer to big pharma, but this whole missing piece of the puzzle that Belinda was presenting in Mallorca was absolutely fascinating, especially with, all of the different connections that, she was able to make and you were able to make, and together, I believe with, was it Dr. Zoe Harcombe, you did all this research and you were able to put all these different string all these dots together, and it really was fascinating to see it all come together. And I'm looking forward to having Belinda on the show as well to talk really in depth about all these different connections, because it is quite mind-blowing when you see it all tied together.
Well, that's where my talks are heading at the moment, talking about how did we get duped? Belinda's got the vested interests sorted, and her ability to string all this together um, over 100 years, or more like 150 years, is incredibly informative and disturbing at the same time. So I won't. I'm going to encourage your listeners to watch out for that, because that's big stuff. My concern is that our medical education, as not just doctors but as healthcare professionals right across the board, has been hijacked by those vested interests, and that all goes back to. I'm not giving much away with Belinda's work there. That a bit over 100 years ago, the dietary guidelines were developed with the formation of the American Dietetics Association in 1917, and they, and particularly one woman by the name of Lena Cooper, who was working for John Harvey Kellogg's at the time, effectively wrote the textbooks for dietetics for the next 30 to 40 years. And they formed the textbooks and the knowledge base for the Western dietetics educational model. So that included the US, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa in particular. And by definition, they then sort of moved into being involved in the World Health Organization, United Nations, and then dietary guidelines for a lot of countries that followed the US model. And it's there's a term I use, generational education. I don't know if you've heard that, where we believe our teachers, and we particularly believe our teachers if they believe their teachers before them. And so most of the things in our textbooks have been there for decades, and we refine them, but we never actually really challenge them. And sort of the whole thing's about if you eat fat, it's bad for your heart because it'll clog your arteries. If you eat salt, it's bad for your blood pressure. If you eat fibre, you need that to keep your bowel clean. Oh, they're just three complete and utter myths, as it turns out. But they've stood the test of that passage of time, where people have said, oh, of course you've got to have fibre in your diet to keep your bowel clean. Of course, if you have salt in your diet, it's going to push your blood pressure up. And the brain's dependent on glucose. You've got to have glucose and carbohydrate to keep your brain functioning. It astounds me that we haven't challenged these earlier, and that's part of our education. Most people in the health system are very good at what I call reading, repeating, and then being rewarded. You know that if you actually go and do an exam, you just read the textbook, or read what the lecturer told you, repeat it in the exam, and you're going to pass the exam, and then and that's it. But if you actually read something and then challenge it, then I can guarantee you might end up following the lifestyle I've had for the last 10 years of actually finding it quite a challenging pathway for yourself. But if you know you're right on something, then it's very hard to back down. And I use a term which I say, once you see the results of LCHF or keto, you can't unsee them. I'm putting together a talk at the moment about diabetes. I've been asked to speak at the International Diabetes meeting next year as a plenary speech, and my talk will be, let's turn diabetes around in 6 hours. Why won't the system let us do it? And literally, you can gain control of type 2 diabetes and improve the control of type 1 within hours, simply by stopping putting carbohydrate in your mouth. And
yeah, I love that quote by you saying you can turn diabetes type 2 around in an afternoon if that's what you
yes,
want.
yeah, and often when people come to me and with multiple health issues, and I realise I'm an orthopaedic surgeon, but to be, my patients are a reflection of the community, with 2/3 of them are overweight or obese. An increasing number are having diabetes, or at least pre-diabetic. As a result of that, they have their health issues. They have stresses related to that. They're worried about their job security, their family security, all of those things. And I often say to them that, look, you're down a deep, dark hole at the moment. You may or may not have depression. You can't really see an exit strategy. You're worried about your finances. But the one thing you have total and utter control over is what you decide to put in your mouth this afternoon, or whether you decide, in fact, to actually not put anything in. And I know that sounds like a fairly simple concept, but the number of patients and people I mention it to, you can see them actually have a little awakening moment that they actually are more empowered in their outcome than they think they are. And often it's just pointing them in the right direction. And even if that first step is to actually, okay, I won't put 2 sugars in my coffee this afternoon, I'll just put 1. And then you work very slowly back from that. But that has been one of the most rewarding parts of my practice in the last several years, is to actually see people take back control of their life after they have not been able to control it for decades. And you'll be seeing that with your own listeners. And is that can you say that? Can you see something with your listeners? There we go. That's just maybe a tautology. Maybe you can hear that from your listeners. Can you hear something from your listeners? See how I get myself?
You're too smart for your own
Yeah, I
good,
know. It's
Gary.
this is the beginning of the day here, and I haven't been drinking. So that's just a little pondering. But that's it. I get myself into little philosophical knots like that. Anyway,
Well, I really admire how much you've challenged the nutritional dogma, because this is one thing that I found frustrating when I was in university. I first studied nutrition and I was being told things that I knew were not right. And it's been the same thing every time I've gone back to study nutrition, until finally I said, screw it, I'm just going to study biochemistry, because it's the only place where the knowledge and the facts are there and they can't be manipulated. But then I'm going back to the nutritional aspects again, and I'm having to, deal with this quite a bit of frustration of taking tests on things that I know are false. And it's just an exercise of will and determination to just, go with it. Because when you challenge these notions, like you said, people get very, very upset, especially when you challenge things that, um, like fruit. We talk about when we do, posts about fruit. If I do a post about fruit, or if I did a post about fiber 2 days ago, and I was told that my comments were dangerous, because I'm telling people that my digestion has improved since having less fiber. So when we challenge these notions, you get a lot of pushback. And I find fruit and fiber are two of the worst ones.
I that talk I've given of is fruit good or bad for you, um, is it cops more flack than anything else. Actually, no, it cops more, a lot of flack. But we are defensive of our education because we can't believe that we got it wrong. I gave a talk recently to some doctors in Melbourne, which is great to see. There were about 120 doctors that turned up for this weekend meeting, whereas originally there was only one or two of us. And in the audience there were doctors who were angry, and Glinda and I talk about it, say, oh, they're in the angry phase now, and it's partly when they realise that what they've been taught is wrong. Not only was it wrong, it was also a lie. And when they find out that it was deliberate, A, they're personally affronted that they didn't see it. B, that the system allowed it. And then they want to do something about it. And so doctors in the angry phase are good. There's a personal level to all of this, and that we've been through that, and a lot of your listeners will do it as well. Is that this is, if we've been eating the standard American diet, the SAD diet, whether it's standard American, or Australian, or Canadian, or whatever, with all that sugar, carbohydrate, and polyunsaturated oils, we've actually been harming not only ourselves, but we've been harming our children. And I have my personal thoughts about all the problems related to mental health in our total population, but particularly our children, attention deficit disorder, the number of allergies, the immune problems are all floating around. I think are clearly related to our nutrition over a long period of time. But as a parent, you've actually fed that to your children, and you've watched them have troubles. And we've got 3 kids, and all 3 are beautiful. They're adults, we're grandparents now. But our children were raised in a pro-inflammatory state, not only as children, but also in the embryonic development level. We've actually apologised to our kids and said, look, we're sorry, but we did what we thought was the best thing at the time, but now we're trying to make amends. So there's a lot of people who
Right.
feel really guilty about what they've done, not only to themselves, but also to their children. It's probably important to recognise that as part of the grief reaction that people go through when they find out about low carb and keto.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And I always say, I was raised on the high carb, zero fat, because my parents were doing the best that they thought, the best that they could with the information that they had available. And it's definitely never to fault them, but they were giving us what they thought was the healthiest, best foods, best diet based on what they were being told. And they didn't know that they were being so poorly informed. And I want to ask you about disinformation, because this is a big part of the problem it's not just, that our research isn't up to date, or those kinds of things, that there actually is this disinformation that is being propagated, that is providing a lot of these bad facts that, we've then, like you said, repeated, and we've, ingrained them in our lifestyles and our approach. But that disinformation is a powerful source of bad facts that people have to then go through the whole the steps of challenging that, and then to even be open to some of these new notions that you're presenting to them. And I think that's one of the most difficult things, is when you're trying to share this information with someone that you know needs it, and yet they're not open to that because they've received all these bad facts, and so everything you say, is contrary to that, and therefore it's wrong, or it's not, um, correct.
Well, I'm delighted to hear you use the word disinformation. I thought I introduced that into the keto vocabulary about a year ago, because it's not misinformation. Misinformation is, it's just misinformed, but disinformation is a deliberate misinformation. And that's, as I say, where we've been spending our time for the last couple of years. I think people need to find it for themselves, and thank goodness for Google. As an entering wedge into that equation, into that information, I sort of say, well, you talk about the benefits of breakfast cereal, and breakfast cereal. Sorry, we've succumbed to the propaganda that breakfast cereal is important, and breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and our breakfast cereal has to have fibre in it so it keeps us nice and regular. And often my entering wedge into that is that I say, well, look, the cereal industry want us to know that. And the cereal industry, we've hammered them about sugar, so now they're on the back foot about that. We've hammered them about carbohydrate now, so they're starting to get on the back foot about that. So the last bastion of self-defense for the cereal industry is fibre. So we've got to have clearly, the disinformation now is that fibre is there for our gut health. I suspect that a fair amount of the gut microbiome talk is actually part of a smoke screen for saying that fibre's got to be maintained. But my opening wedge with all that is I say, well, to patients and to people, I say, well, you realise why Kellogg's invented breakfast cereal? And most people go, no, well, they start thinking about the commercial interests. And then I just say, look, John Harvey Kellogg invented breakfast cereal to stop us from masturbating.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's ludicrous, but the great thing about Google, as I say to people, when no one's watching and no one's, recording what you're actually doing on your computer, just Google cereal and masturbation. And the
Yeah.
name John Harvey Kellogg's will come up straight away. So we're not literally making this stuff up. And
Yeah.
so when you realize that our food guidelines for the world, that food pyramid which has stood the test of time, which people still refer to, that cereal-based, anti-meat, anti-dairy, and rapidly becoming pro-vegan vegetarian, actually had its origins with developing a food pyramid and food guidelines to stop us from masturbating. And I'm not making this stuff up to your listeners. And that it was, cereal was there to quell our lustful thoughts because it was bland. That's the origins of our food guidelines. That's the disinformation that was put out there by the cereal industry, which has effectively been there right at the beginning since October 1917. And they've been pushing that agenda for a long time. That then has suited the business model of the cereal industry in particular. The other thing which has followed suit is that the same church group that have been pushing the cereal industry and the cereal agenda pretty well effectively own the soy industry of the world, as well as the alternative meat industry. So when you find that our food guidelines fit into that economic and ideological model of the Garden of Eden diet, then you can see how we've gotten completely and utterly mucked up. And I'm all for people having their beliefs and what they want to do with their diet and what they want to feed themselves and their family. But I have a real issue when it's in fact been a complete and utter abject failure based on a public health level. So I'm not certain how many of your listeners are aware that we've in fact, as a society in the last 45 years, actually followed the dietary guidelines perfectly. And I presented some of that data. It's primarily US data, but when it's mimicked around the world. But over the last 45 years, we have actually increased our cereal and grain intake into our diet. We have increased our protein intake by having more nuts and legumes, and reduced our red meat intake. we actually did increase our chicken intake in the same time frame. And we've actually been having more fruit and vegetable. So according to the dietary guidelines and that food pyramid, it's been highly successful at a community level. So we've done exactly as we're supposed to do, but as in the same time frame, the entire community has gotten fatter and sicker. And not just in the US and Canada and Australia, but right across the developing nations as well, as they're mimicking the dietary guidelines that are being pushed upon everyone. And as it turns out, it's all disinformation because it's promoted by the cereal industry, the fake meat industry now, the alternative meats. That same church group came up with nut analogues in the as meat alternatives in the late 19th century. So fake meat's been around for a long time.
Hey guys, just taking a really quick break to talk about the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge. If you're interested in doing a ketogenic diet for yourself, it's a great place to start. I teach you everything about how to follow a keto diet to get yourself into nutritional ketosis, and it includes 28 days of meal plans. It comes with weekly shopping lists, how to interpret results, how to test yourself, a complete guide to getting started on keto. If you've been keto for a while and you're just not getting the results that you want to in terms of your health or fat loss, or you are brand new to keto, the 28-day challenge is a great option because it also comes with my free coaching and support in our members Facebook group, and you can post any questions that you have about the meal plans, about keto, and I am there supporting you. We have an amazing community in our group. I like to call it the happiest place on earth because everybody in there is so excited about following keto, about having found something that really works well for them, and everyone in there is just so kind, caring, generous, and supportive, and it's a really fun place to be and hang out. So if you'd like more info on it, you can find it at ketogenicgirl.com, and it's the 28-day Ketogenic Girl Challenge.
It's absolutely astounding. And actually, when Belinda was doing her presentation, I had actually heard about that connection with the Kellogg company because my husband had shown me on YouTube some videos like 4 or 5 years before, because we were talking about circumcision. He said, they're behind this push for circumcision and it's all connected back to this. So when Belinda started talking about that, I was like, oh, wow, there's more, connections. But at the time, didn't make the connection to the cereal and then influencing that, our food guidelines, and that being this, deliberate disinformation, as you were saying. It's really quite fascinating. And like you said, anyone can Google it and look it up on YouTube. There's quite a bit of information there.
Well, I think it's just an opening. Well, I'll actually use the church's term, an entering wedge into the topic, into that. When you start looking into it, then you find it. Like last year here in Australia, the Assistant Minister of Health, the nation's Assistant Minister of Health, gave a media release talking about the benefits of fibre in the diet. And when you looked at the media release, it was actually written by Kellogg's.
Wow.
So we've got literally the Minister of Health standing up there in front of the nation saying, this is what we've got to do. We've all got to increase our fibre intake, and particularly cereal. Oh, and by the way, this has actually been written for me by the cereal industry. We as individuals can only make up a small amount of noise about it. Whereas the national media get completely on board of it. Oh yeah, we've got to save everyone because everyone's got to have more and more fibre, and it's been a complete and utter piece of disinformation. But then don't ever forget that mosquitoes in a room are a really, really big nuisance, and that's we recognise that that's what we are, and that's pretty well our defence in trying to get that message out there is to staving mosquitoes in the room, or is to use Belinda's term, be noisy with me, and she's got that as a hashtag, be noisy with me. So I've got to thank her because she's actually not only been my bride for 35 years coming up in about a month's time, but she has just stood by my side and challenged the system rather than just the science, and that takes a fair degree of bravery. Um, I can't. I don't want to preempt your interview with her, but and what she'll be talking on in San Diego in a week's time. But what she's now uncovered is another whole layer of vested interests, which are not only influencing our dietary guidelines for the last 100 years, but actually influencing the current American Dietary Guidelines Review Panel. And so if you think that, the history of this topic is that our dietary guidelines have been manipulated by vested interests for 100 years. No surprises there. But exactly what are they up to today is what we need to be focusing on. And so really watch that space, because it's fascinating. And look, I don't mind people having their opinion. We don't mind that. But as long as you declare your vested interest when you're presenting that opinion, particularly to dietary guideline review panels, when you're putting it in the media, when you're giving a presentation, and if you're under the influence of those vested interests, then declare which hat you're wearing, because virtually everything in nutrition, as you said earlier, is not based on science. It's based on opinion. It's based on association evidence. It's based on vested interests and dollars, and strangely enough, based on religious ideology and the Garden of Eden diet for salvation and not for our health.
Why do you think that people don't take food or diet seriously, and they kind of dismiss the notion of how powerful it can be in terms of determining our health?
That's a simple one. I know I'm making things sound a bit simple, but we have been under the influence of a concept that if you're fat, it's because you're lazy. But again, that term, that exercise is medicine. In Australia, we had a Life Be In It program that started 42 years ago. And effectively, it says that if you're fat, it's because you're not moving enough. It's because you're lazy. And that whole concept of getting people out to exercise, put on your gym gear, put on your training shoes, get out and start running, go to the play more and more sport, has been deliberately ingrained in our culture, again, by vested interests. And that's part of Belinda's talk coming up, in that when you start finding, how on earth did we start believing that we needed to be out to outrun a bad diet? But for my entire lifetime, and I know I'm older than you, that's what I've been believing. I was raised as a kid. If my mother I was a fat kid. My mother had me out running and exercising. So that's again, here's a little, a side snippet of information. Before 1950, the indications for exercise, the ones in the medical textbooks were, or not really the medical textbooks, but number one was you needed to exercise to go off to war. So you could be faster and stronger than the other person. I've got no problems with that. We exercised for our mental well-being, so a bit of team sport was pretty good, and becoming involved with others. We exercised for our libido, so if you had a low sexual drive, you were encouraged to exercise. I'm still trying to work that one out. But the other one, well, that just makes you all sweaty. But anyway, no, I should stop there. But the final one was you were encouraged to exercise to lose weight. To put on weight, not to lose weight. And because exercise makes you hungry, once you exercise, you often reward yourself because of all the effort you've done.
There's an overcompensating behavior.
Yes, because I've been party that to myself, as many people are. So prior to 1950, exercising to get healthy and exercising to lose weight really didn't exist as a concept. The fastest growing industry in Australia in the last 10 years has been personal trainer and health coaches. And so, again, deliberate disinformation, as it turns out, by vested interests, and particularly the food industry, in encouraging us to exercise rather than to look at their food product. And many companies, including Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, Nestle, I've got a slide related, all saying, it's all about your lifestyle. So if you're obese, it's nothing to do with our products. It's clearly your lifestyle that's to blame. And that's just advertising propaganda, which has been ingrained into our psyche.
Now, what is your main message on fruit that you would like people to know if they are curious and understanding more about the importance of fructose in the diet, or maybe not having it in your diet?
I get asked this all the time. I suppose I set myself up because I have this website, nofructose.com. But if understand what, and this isn't just with fruit, understand what food and particularly fuel will do to your metabolism. And at the simplistic level, in nature, and we're just animals, but in nature, fruit comes into bearing seasonally, generally towards the end of summer and beginning of autumn. And it's there to be bright, shiny, attractive so that we eat it and so that we can get fat for winter hibernation. So understand that it's just got sugar in it. It's got a higher amount of fructose generally than glucose. And fructose tends to drive behavior. So it'll drive it, doesn't matter whether or not it's in an apple or an orange or a banana, as the same way as it will drive it in a teaspoon of sugar that you put on in your coffee. So if you want to eat fruit, understand that it's going to drive behavior. It's going to tend to make you hungry for the next couple of hours. And that its nutritional benefits are well and truly exaggerated both in nature as well as in the shops. And that's what my talk's about, is actually when you look at the nutritional value of fruit, it's in comparison with vegetables and other foods such as good old meat and dairy and meat and eggs, it is actually very, very nutrient deficient. However, it's marketed accordingly that it's actually highly nutritious for us, when in fact it's a lot of empty fuel there. And so, again, the concept of having your 5 a day of fruit and vegetable and having your daily intake of fruit dates back to 1991 on the west coast of the US, when there was a meeting between the American Cancer Institute and 44 well-meaning food industry partners, including McDonald's and Walmart. And that whole term of fruit and veg actually was invented in 1991. Prior to that, we used to have our meat and veg.
Mm.
And so again, this is a deliberate misinformation that we believe that we have to have our fruit. And I'm happy. So I realize that's a really long answer. My take-home message is, if you want to have fruit, make certain it's fresh, local, and seasonal, and understand that it's going to make you hungry for the next several hours, and it's probably going to be putting on weight, because that's what it's meant to do in nature. So, but gosh, there's been some marketing about fruit, and it's natural sugar as distinct from refined sugar. No, it's just sugar.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny that it was grouped, together as fruit and vegetable. And, it's kind of an insidious thing, especially like you mentioned earlier, for parents who, maybe they understand the dangers of sugar and those kinds of treats, but they want to still provide, some kind of alternative to that. Maybe that's it, is fruit the best option?
I'm not saying that fruit and whole fruit per se is dangerous. A lot of imported fruit's got all sorts of chemicals associated with it, and it's a bit of an unknown potential hazard over time. So I'm not saying that fruit's dangerous. However, if you're going to have fruit, understand it's going to make you hungry, and it's going to potentially put on weight. Now, that's not, I don't really see it as a big issue with children.
Right.
But for those people who are deliberately trying to lose weight, who are deliberately entering into a stage of ketosis for a variety of health reasons, then fruit's going to tip you out of that balance. And again, it's just becoming food aware. And at a, we talk about science, and that, and I love that the fact that you're taking this from the biochemical aspect, because there is nothing more or less pure than the biochemistry of the Krebs cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And for your listeners, the Krebs cycle is pretty well the description of converting the fuels of carbohydrate, protein, and the healthy fats into acetyl-CoA, which is the wood of the wood fire. And so then it enters the mitochondria, and then it comes out as ATP, which is the fuel of life. I mean, that there is nothing more pure than
Mm-hmm.
biochemistry. And then and I come back to that biochemistry, and I will come back to fruit as part of as I digress. But in a wood fire, you can put in kindling branches or logs. The kindling is like carbohydrate; it burns up quickly. The protein and the fats are the branches and the logs. And as a wood fire, the wood fire is completely and utterly unemotional about where the wood comes from. It really doesn't care where it comes. Certainly doesn't care if it comes out of a rainforest or a plantation forest. And the same thing actually happens with our mitochondria. At a mitochondrial cellular level, it does not care where the fuel comes from. It doesn't actually care where it comes from, glucose or from carbohydrate, protein or fat. And there may be subtle efficiencies within the system for burning them up. It's only us as human beings that start becoming emotional about the origins of those fuel sources. My argument, as I think it's yours as well, if you eat something which is fresh, local and seasonal without transport miles on it, it's got benefits because it hasn't been processed. And then my take on it, if it comes in a cardboard box or a plastic bag, it's been processed and there have been chemicals generally added to that, nutrients often taken out, and particularly in the cereals, they've been fortified. And fortified with nutrients means that the stuff's actually lacking it in the first place. So where does fruit come into it? Well, fruit's actually a commodity. It's one of the most traded commodities on the planet. It's one of the most chemically managed and treated commodities on the planet to allow for that transportability. And we as a society have fallen for that disinformation again, that fruit in particular is good for us. And I'm just saying it's been over-marketed for its benefits. But I guess that all comes down to that Garden of Eden diet again, of having your fruits, nuts, legumes, and grains. And we've fallen for it.
It's a lie that we want to believe that, it's nature's candy and it's so good for us because it tastes great, so we want to believe that we're being virtuous and improving our health by eating it. So it's an easy one to believe.
Well, we've been told it, but we got told it by the food industry again. And virtually everything in this nutrition field is a house of cards. And when you poke that house of cards, it comes tumbling down. And I just gave a talk to the National Australian New Zealand Medical Students Association, their national body, and an annual meeting. And my second slide of that talk was, I'm sorry. I'm actually sorry to give you this talk because your education has been completely and utterly stolen from you.
Mm.
And it's been stolen by the food industry when it comes to nutrition, and when it's been stolen by the pharmaceutical industry when it comes to medication. But when you realize all of that, then you can move forward. And it's a
Mm.
bit like you have done, that we've done, when you actually realize what my cells require my mitochondria require as fuel, my cells require with other micronutrients. And it's all completely available by having fresh, local and seasonal food that's not processed and with reduced added sugars. Then life becomes amazing once again. I mean, for me, I couldn't work out why I was sick.
Mm.
You know, supposedly I've got a medical degree and I've got all these letters after my name, but at a personal level, I could not work out why I was sick and why I was getting sicker. And I was trying to do everything right. And now I know that my brain and my education have been completely and utterly screwed over. I can move forward. And I think that's what everyone's journey is with low carb, healthy fat, keto, for the current terms. It's, you can now move forward. You can become empowered. And that's really exciting. It's exciting for the individual. It's exciting for the doctor. It's exciting for the healthcare professional. It's exciting for you. I know when, I caught up with you, you're buzzing, you're onto something, and you're making a difference.
Thank you.
And we're all just mosquitoes in the room.
Mm.
We're only up against the entire food industry of the world. The packaged food industry. But if you've ever tried to go to sleep with a mosquito in the room, it's really hard. And so, I welcome all of your listeners to be a bunch of mosquitoes with us. Let's go out
Mosquitoes
swarming.
unite.
Okay.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, Gary, I just have to ask you before I let you go, what's some advice that you have for your patients or people that you interact with who, are seeking, they want all of this low carb lifestyle and keto, but they struggle with the emotional components of being attached, to some of those foods, that they love to eat, and sugar having been associated with, happiness and all these happy holidays and all these things throughout the year. What are constructive tips that you give to your patients when they're wanting to make that shift, and maybe let go of that?
I think the first thing is educate yourself.
Mm.
Become aware of what effect it's having. Look, emotional eating is massive, and we talked about it earlier. The emotional eating happens because you've got no control, or you feel as though you don't have a lot of control in your life over a variety of matters. Yet the one thing you do actually have control over um, is what you eat. The other thing is don't feel guilty if you don't get it right. One of our daughters took 12 goes. I still remember her telling me, "Oh, Dad, I'm trying to do what you're talking about, and I've just had a box of ice cream or ice creams, or I've just had a box of biscuits. I can't do it." And then she did it again, and she did it again. So it took her 12 serious cracks at it to actually to move towards a keto lifestyle. And she's had a very safe pregnancy, doing it all the way through. We've got a gorgeous grandson who's actually, pretty well low carbing and thriving. But here's a really important take-home message: don't feel guilty if you don't get it right.
Mm.
Some people, I'd rather you actually do it 90% of the time and get it 90% right and don't feel guilty, rather than do it 99% of the time, get it wrong 1% of the time, and get completely and utterly cut up, have the guilt, and then rebound.
Mm.
So in the transition, guess what? If 90% of the people did 90% of this 90% of the time for 90% of the planet, we'd turn our health around. We'd turn around our environmental health, which is a whole topic which we can get onto today. We everything, the health disaster that's prevailing upon us right now at a society level, would be turned around. The juggernaut could be turned around. So don't feel guilty if you can't do it 100% of the time tomorrow or today. For me, I was able to go hardcore. For Belinda, it took her a lot longer. And interestingly, men tend to actually do it a bit easier, and they actually often get the weight loss a bit quicker. And for a variety of hormonal reasons, women struggle to lose weight quickly. They often feel better quickly. Their waist circumference often comes down quite quickly, but their weight often doesn't change for a long time. And you'll have probably heard that story many times over. But don't feel guilty if it's not working, because it is actually working, but it's just working at a little bit slower.
That's really wonderful advice, and I'm sure a lot of people heard that, and it's just really nice to have that encouragement for so many people who are listening to this and who are making those changes, for themselves, but also for their families, for their communities, and to inspire other people to make those changes too and gain more health and, possibly prevent, some of the chronic non-infectious disease, that we're seeing out there in such huge numbers today. So I really love that tip and that encouragement for our listeners. And I have to thank you for being so brave and all that you do in sharing this information, both you and Belinda, and just everything that you've been through. It must have been, just a very challenging, harrowing experience. But now that you've come on the other side of it, to be able to go out there and inspire other doctors and physicians and share all this information. And I'm so thankful for what both of you, are doing. And thank you for taking the time today, to come on here and share this with our listeners.
Well, we actually don't think we're brave. We just think we're doing the right thing. And I think, part of us actually, we often say we should actually just pull our heads down now, and just sit in our backwater of Tasmania. But now that we understand the vested interests,
Mm,
we do sort of see a bit of a leadership role here
mm,
to let people know what those vested interests are.
yes.
As to how much longer we keep going with it all, look, whilst there's still a fire in our bellies, then we'll keep doing it. But one of the things about going to low carb meetings and meeting you in particular is we can see, okay, there's another generation coming on here
Mm,
that are fired up and ready to get that message out there to the people, to let them know that it's okay to eat real food. And in fact, eating real fresh food is actually our only exit strategy.
mm.
So I want to thank you for being there in the first place and letting me have a chat to you this morning or this afternoon where you are.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Gary, and we'll look forward to having you back on Fast Keto again in the future. Thanks so much for being here today.
Let's have a live meal again. All right.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's episode with Gary. He is such a fantastic human being, such an incredibly heroic doctor, and just an all-around awesome person. And I had such a fun time having him on the podcast. I love all the info that he shared. So many practical, usable tips and information for people. So I hope you guys enjoyed tuning into today's episode. And if you'd like to find out more about Dr. Gary Fettke, you can follow him on Twitter under Fructose No and on Instagram under I Support Gary. So, and his wife Belinda is also on Instagram there under Belinda Fetke, and she is going to be coming on Fast Keto as well, because she has, as we talked about on this episode, uncovered some incredibly remarkable facts about the food guidelines that we utilize and that basically govern our whole approach to nutrition in the Western world, and what some of the actual hidden sort of secret special interests that are behind some of this, which is absolutely fascinating. So look out for that episode. If you are interested in trying out keto for yourself, or you've been doing keto for a while by yourself and not getting the results that you want to get. I would love to be your personal guide and coach. You can check out the Ketogenic Girl Challenge at ketogenicgirl.com. It is a program that comes with my meal plans. It also comes with my unlimited support and coaching in our Facebook group for members. And it is all of my best knowledge and information about keto. And it is a very effective program for getting into deep ketogenesis, into burning fat for fuel, becoming fat adapted. And I'm just there to be with you, to be your support and your guide, and answer any questions that you have when you're going through this, or just being a support for you and helping you figure out the best way to get to your goals and to maximize your results. So check that out at ketogenicgirl.com. If you like today's episode, share it with someone that you think might benefit from hearing Dr. Gary Fettke talk so well about health and nutrition and preventative health, and leave me a rating and review. I would absolutely love to hear from you and love to hear what you enjoyed from the show. So until the next episode, I hope you have a fat-filled rest of your day. A few disclaimers. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice, as I am not a qualified healthcare provider. The information presented on this podcast is for educational purposes only. Ketogenic Girl is not qualified to provide medical advice. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to this podcast. Prior to beginning a ketogenic diet, you should undergo a full health screening with your physician to confirm that a keto diet is suitable for you and to rule out any conditions or contraindications that may pose risks or that are incompatible with the ketogenic diet. A keto diet may or may not be appropriate for you if you have any kind of health condition, whether known to you or unknown, so you must consult your physician to find this out. Anyone under the age of 18 should consult with their physician and their parents or legal guardian.